What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here's my fantasy football advice for NFL Week 17. This fantasy football advice is for informational purposes only. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. Okay, in this video, I'm going to give you a sleeper and a stud for each position. And if you stay to the very end after all my picks and after I show you the Draft Dashboard tools, I'll give you my super secret sleeper pick that no one's talking about. Okay, let's see who we have at the quarterback position. I like Ben Roethlisberger for the Pittsburgh Steelers playing the Cincinnati Bengals, who have the absolute worst defense overall and give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Ben Roethlisberger has scored 33, 15, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games, averaging 24.6 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets 2 rush attempts per game. This is a home game for Ben Roethlisberger. Fantastic matchup. I love Big Ben here versus the Cincinnati Bengals in Week 17. Okay, now for a low salary quarterback that may fly under the radar. I like Sam Darnold from the New York Jets playing the New England Patriots, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, but they give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Sam Darnold has scored 29, 22, and 11 fantasy points in his last 3 games, averaging 15.2 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets 3.6 rushes per game. Sam Darnold has been heating up, and he's got a pretty good matchup versus the New England Patriots here in Week 17. You know there's going to be extra incentive for Sam Darnold to win that game. He's probably going to be behind and forced to throw the ball, where he's been having a lot of success lately. Before I continue, please take a second and do this right now. If you want to join the team for free, all you have to do is like this video, hit that red subscribe button, and tap that bell icon so you never miss a thing. Okay, moving on to the running back position. I like Ezekiel Elliott from the Dallas Cowboys playing the New York Giants, who have the 12th worst defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Ezekiel Elliott has scored 16, 19, and 34 fantasy points in his last 3 games, averaging 23.4 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets 6.3 targets per game and 20.3 rushes per game. Tons of volume for Ezekiel Elliott, who's got a fantastic matchup, and he's going to want to show off for Saquon Barkley and the New York Giants here in Week 17. Okay, let's take a look at a low salary running back who may fly under the radar. I like Doug Martin from the Oakland Raiders playing the Kansas City Chiefs, who are the 2nd worst defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Doug Martin has scored 22, 4, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He's only averaging 7.7 fantasy points per game on 1.5 targets and 10 rush attempts. But that seemed to change last game. He got 21 rush attempts and scored 22 fantasy points. It reminds me of the breakout Derrick Henry game. I just think they're going to give Doug Martin that same opportunity here in a stellar matchup versus the Kansas City Chiefs in Week 17. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. I like Antonio Brown for the Pittsburgh Steelers playing the Cincinnati Bengals, who are the absolute worst defense overall, and they give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Antonio Brown has scored 48, 15, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games, averaging 22.6 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets 11.2 targets per game. He got 19 targets last game. Huge game for Antonio Brown. He's got a fantastic matchup here in Week 17 versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, now for a low salary wide receiver who may fly under the radar. I like Curtis Samuel from the Carolina Panthers playing the New Orleans Saints, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, but they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Curtis Samuel has scored 11, 4, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games, averaging 10.2 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets an average of 5.1 targets per game, but he got 13 targets last game. Stellar matchup for Curtis Samuel here in Week 17. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. I like Travis Kelce for the Kansas City Chiefs playing the Oakland Raiders, who are the 3rd worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Travis Kelce has scored 10, 13, and 21 fantasy points in the last 3 games, averaging 24 fantasy points per game on the season, and he gets 9.4 targets per game. You'll see he got 9 targets the last 3 games. Super consistent, huge upside here with Travis Kelce versus a terrible Oakland Raiders defense in Week 17. Okay, now for a low salary tight end who might fly under the radar. I like Chris Herndon from the New York Jets playing the New England Patriots, who are about middle of the pack defense overall, but they give up the 11th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Chris Herndon has scored 20, 8, and 2 fantasy points in the last 3 games, averaging 8.6 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets 4.1 targets per game. He got 7 targets last game. If you're going to play Sam Darnold, of course Robbie Anderson and Chris Herndon should be one of your targets versus a mediocre New England pass defense here in Week 17. If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to DraftDashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. You've unlocked the bonus content. My super secret sleeper pick for Week 17 is Chris Godwin from the Tampa Bay Bucks playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 4th worst defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Chris Godwin has scored 7, 0, and 2 fantasy points in his last 3 games, averaging 10.9 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets almost 6 targets per game. Chris Godwin has fallen off the map the past few games, but I like him here in a fantastic matchup in Week 17 versus the Atlanta Falcons. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for Week 17. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.